What's going on? This is another episode of the Brett Snodgrass podcast. I am Brett Snodgrass, and I got an amazing show for you guys today. I got Mr. Tim Porter on the show with me. Before we get talking about Tim Porter, go over to YouTube and subscribe to the Brett Snodgrass channel. Would appreciate you guys so much. And also leave a comment in the comment sections, and I will get to you guys when I got time. All right, guys, who is Mr. Tim Porter? Number one, Tim Porter, he provides solution for businesses. He is a strategist, a consultant, and a coach. He's written 2 books now, God's Business Faith and God's Business Revival. Tim says the next revival, right? We've seen some revivals in the past, but the next revival that God is coming after is the workplace. Pay attention, guys. If you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a business leader, this show's for you. Let's get to it with Tim Porter. What's going on, Tim?
Hey, a little bit of everything. How you doing, Brett?
I'm doing fantastic. I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. I'm super excited. I love talking about, number one, entrepreneurship and business mixed with kingdom and kingdom principles, and you kind of just drip with all of that. So I really appreciate you being on. And I always like to start off with this question, Tim. So number one, who is Tim Porter?
When I grow up, I'll let you know. Okay. So I'm not sure if I should tell you who my mother thinks I am or somebody else, but the short version is this. I'll just give you kind of a mini resume, because where I found myself is I'm here because I've been obedient, and God has placed me here. It's kind of weird because I find myself that I went back to school and got my MBA because God said, hey, I need your credentials in the business world. And then God said, hey, I need you to get ordained because I need your credentials in the church world. And I'm like, oh God, wait a second here. You're blowing my mind a little bit. Can let's back up. I think I can figure the MBA out, but you're gonna have to help me figure that part out too. But you got to do the ordination piece. And so sure enough, he came through. I'm ordained actually as a marketplace minister. And so, but those two things kind of really give a strong picture of who I am and how I've merged into where I am. The background, other than those two things, is that I hate to admit it, I probably spent more than 30 years in sales and operations, and have taken all those experiences along with my credentials and really formulated that into a position where I can help businesses find solutions to their problems, and as well as spiritual solutions and kingdom principles and all the above. So there you go. How's that? That's who I am.
I love it. I mean, I don't know if I've heard of typically a marketplace minister. So I know, you basically say you work with business owners on kingdom principles, and kind of like take us through a day-to-day of your life. Like, what do you do? I'm a business owner. I come to you, and how do you work with me?
Well, the first thing I do is I figure out where you want to be, or where you're going, or what your problem is, or what your challenge is. Sometimes that it just screams because there's some problem or something that's screaming in the face of a business owner. Sometimes it's just a hunch that the business owner has, that they know something's not right. They really just say, hey, listen, I need to make some changes. I just don't know what they are. And obviously sometimes it could be anywhere in between. Most recently, right now, what I see is that there are so many businesses who have made it through this recent economic lockdown. And some states are still having challenges with that with certain restrictions on businesses, et cetera. And they know they've made it through this last lockdown, but they're like, what's going to happen next? This business is my livelihood. This business is my calling. This business feeds my family. I know I'm supposed to be doing this business for whatever reason, but I know that if I don't make some changes of some kind, I'm not going to be able to make it through the next one. I'm not going to be able to make it through when something happens again. So what I like to do is just come alongside them, work as a coach or a consultant, but basically find the solutions that they need, strategies, tactics, in order to make sure that the hatches are battened down for the next one, that the cash flow is there for the future. Because at the end of the day, many of us have heard the phrase that let's make sure you're running your business and your business isn't running you.
Yeah.
And so we just, because especially from a spiritual standpoint, that can be a little dangerous. So I could say a lot more, but we'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's so needed. The more I am in business, the more I'm even in life, I'm like, I love for someone to come alongside me, someone that's already walked down that road. That's what I always preach. Get a mentor, get a coach, get a consultant, someone's already been there, shorten the learning curve a little bit. And that's exactly what you do, especially when it comes to kingdom, because, your values also have to match up. So Tim, just getting back to, number one, I gave my life to Christ it was 11 years ago. Right away, I said, oh my gosh, why didn't anyone tell me? I need to tell everybody about this. I need to go into ministry. I need to be a pastor. I need to go into the church world. And so you talk about this, the marketplace ministry, and you have a strong passion for the kingdom advancing in the marketplace. So where did this come from for you? Was it just something that happened? You're like, this is so needed in the marketplace, but talk to us about this a little bit.
So great question. First of all, I was saved. Okay. I got my fire insurance at about 4 years old. All right. So I literally grew up in the church. I grew up in a Christian school. The Bible that I have memorized comes from it being ingrained from my Christian school teachers. And I am so thankful for them. Regardless of their denomination, I am so thankful for them and what they ingrained in me, because they ingrained God's word in me. As I grew, though, I realized, okay, there's got to be something a little bit more than just this head knowledge. And so I grew in my faith. I grew in my relationship with God, and I thought I wanted to be a preacher, and in fact held a local preacher's license while I was still in college. But what I found, though, was something very interesting, was that right after college, I found myself in a business meeting where tens of thousands of people were at this business meeting. Probably, I don't know, probably don't want to exaggerate too much, but there was definitely more than 10,000 people at this business meeting, because it was in a large arena, a weekend deal, one of those rah type meetings where everybody comes in and gets you fired up, right? Mm-hmm. So they announced that they're going to have a special Sunday morning session. So if you want to come and hear kind of what some of the secrets are to the business, come to a Sunday morning session. Well, I'd already been privy to what happens at a Sunday morning session. It's a worship service and a preacher. And the preacher was one of the head business guys, right? So, but here's the crazy thing, though, was that I'm sitting there in my seat, a little bit higher up in the bowl in this arena, and I start to see that they give an altar call at the end. And I start to see these people walk down, okay, for first time commitments to Christ. And I'm like, there's 10, there's 20, there's 100, there's 200. I mean, there were several hundred people and that came forward, and then another group that were rededicating their lives. And then I flashed that back to a Sunday morning service where maybe they didn't give an altar call. And I'm not judging whether a church gives altar calls or not, but there has to be at some point an ask. And so, or maybe if they did give an altar call, it was the same person with the same problem every week. And so I just started to say, okay, wait a second, God, if you're using business to get these people attention and get them in the kingdom, what am I missing? What am I missing here? What do I need to see? What am I doing? And then I started to put two and two together, and I realized, okay, and right now I'm thinking I have a very specific person in mind that I used to see go to the altar every week at this church I went to. And literally almost every week, this person would go, their eyes would be bawling, they'd be crying. One of the pastors would come, and they were in a miserable state in their life. And then I looked at some business principles, and I started to put two and two together, and I realized, wow, if this person could apply kingdom financial and kingdom business principles to their life, would they be at the altar every week? because what was the source of their problem? What was the source of their issue? Anyway, so I really started to see, okay, God, if you're using this, and from that point, I dug in and sought out some of the best teachers in the world as far as kingdom business principles go, and have learned from some of the best. And I've got to give credit where credit's due, so I have to mention some names. I have to mention Peter J. Daniels, Dr. Daniels from Adelaide, Australia, who is a billionaire, a kingdom business giant, has been for years. He's now 89. Speaking of Australia, there's Dave Hodgson, who is also a billionaire in Australia on the Gold Coast, who has, in fact, I'm the Los Angeles chapter leader for Kingdom Investors of his organization. Fantastic group. Dave Yarnes, who is a Kingdom entrepreneur and the vice president of Morningstar Ministries in South Carolina and president of the Kingdom Business Association. I've learned from him. And Michael Pink, who's best known for his Selling Among Wolves and just incredible biblical sales stuff that he teaches. And I could go on, but those are four men that have really shaped my life, because I'm like, where I know there's information out here. And I have to bring in Lance Wallnau. Dr. Lance Wallnau has also been an amazing influence on my life, because he really opened me up to the application and why we need to pursue the marketplace.
I love it. And thank you so much for giving credit where credit's due. That's amazing. And it's, again, guys, it just goes back to surrounding yourself with good teachers and just learning, right? I mean, I love sitting at people's feet and just learning like you, Tim. And that's exactly why I do this podcast, is to learn from guys already walking that walk. And Tim, you've written several books. One book that I have gotten into, that I've dove into, is God's Business Revival. Which is, one of your newer books. And in your book, you talk about these different types of revivals. You talk about the level 1, the level 2, and then the level 3 revival is coming. So let's talk about that. What is level 1? What is level 2? And what is this new revival that you believe is coming?
Well, sometimes we have to put things in certain terms so we can wrap our earthly heads around God's heavenly ideas and God's heavenly intentions. Because as we know, we have a tendency to screw up what he has planned. Thankfully, he is so much more powerful than any mistake we can ever make. Let me define a level 3 revival very quickly by telling you what a level 1 is and a level 2, and then compare it to a level 3. Level 1 revival, old-fashioned, old school. Think of the old tent meeting, or the revival week when you were a kid, going to church, and everybody went forward because the pastor was the one that had the anointing. You want to be prayed for by the pastor. You want to be prayed for by the speaker that week, the special speaker. You wanted the touch of whatever God brought to that meeting. Level 2 is where I see a lot of churches are starting to go today, because they kind of get this, that it's not about the guy on the stage. Okay, we've kind of stepped back from personality preachers a little bit, and we realize that, hey, it's not all about the personality on the stage or the power that's on the stage, but the power that's in you. And so what happens is that, for example, I was at a church service recently where the pastor said, okay, we're going to give an altar call right now, or whatever it was. He said, but if you have a need, if you need to be prayed for or something, you're not going to come forward. I want you to turn around and you raise your hand. There's going to be people that are going to come and pray for you. So there's the power is being, let's go back to Martin Luther, for crying out loud. In the Reformation, it's the power to the people, right? And so, but the challenge with both of those, 1 and 2, is that they're both kind of still within the 4 walls of the church. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people talk about being outside of the 4 walls of the church and what that looks like. Let me first say this, that this whole destination Christianity thing, that's what I call it, where we have to go someplace to serve. We have to go someplace to the church to hear God. We have to go someplace. That is such Greek thinking that comes from about a few hundred years before Christ, where I think it was Plato or somebody and a couple other philosophers said that there was a difference between the secular and the sacred, that there was a difference between the spirit and the physical. And so everything spiritual was good, everything physical was bad. And so there wound up being this separation. That's not Hebraic thinking at all. Hebraic thinking is that everything's the case. That's the Greek thinking, is where we get our whole concept of this whole division division between church versus state. And God's called me to bridge this gap between business and the church, because they're the same thing. God wants us to use business for his glory. So level 3 revival is this. Level 3 revival is those people doing it on their own, okay, without the pastor saying, okay, now turn to your neighbor. But the level 3 revival is those same people outside the pews, outside the 4 walls of the church, doing stuff. And I'm not talking about running to Walmart and figuring out somebody to pray for, because trust me, 30% of the people need to be prayed for right now at Walmart. But I'm talking about your everyday life. Maybe pray for the cashier as you're at Walmart or Walgreens or whatever store you happen to be at, but integrate God into everything you do on a daily basis at your work. Every email that you write, every business meeting that you're in, every business plan you put together, everything that you do, partner with God, because God is with us 24/7, and that's what he wants. And so look for opportunities and look for things, look for stuff to happen, and look for the power of God to release himself in you individually on an everyday basis.
I love that. And you obviously, talk a lot to CEOs and business owners about this revival coming within the marketplace. You talk about that already at your business conference. And you talk about this in your book, that the biggest pass that we give the enemy is that we expect the marketplace to be evil. So tell us about this statement. And is this something that you have experienced at the church, within the 4 walls of the church? Is this their thinking?
Unfortunately, it still is in a lot of traditional circles. And it kind of goes back again to where I was talking about the whole Greek versus the Hebraic concept, where Greek kind of has separated the secular from the sacred, when in all reality they're this, God, we're a whole being, and our whole being needs to be every piece of everything that we do. I mean, Jesus came to restore wholeness. The word shalom, the word peace, the word eirene in the Greek, part of the meaning is wholeness. And so it's the wholeness that needs to be restored. And so yeah, there has been this division. In fact, one of my working titles of my first book that I threatened to call it was Separation of Church and Business, because it's got such a, obviously it's got a decent ring to it, but the bottom line is that it is, that's what happens is that there is, Danny Johnson. Oh, I love the way she puts it, because she's an incredible speaker. Danny Johnson was the first ever person to appear on Undercover Millionaire, and is an incredible, powerful woman of God. And she said when she got saved, okay, it's time to, like you alluded to earlier, when she got saved, she's okay, it's time to pack up and go to seminary. Mm-hmm. And so, and unfortunately, we pursue what we think God wants because it's supposed to be churchy, and our dreams die. Our business dreams die. And wait a second, God gave you those business dreams, and those business dreams are your connection to your calling. And it's in the power of the whole person, okay, that allows you to be the most effective in the kingdom of God for everything that he's called you to. So you've got to marry your dreams and your calling so that with God, so that you can take what he's given you in the natural and then partner with God so that the natural becomes the supernatural. So yeah, there's been a disconnect, and we have to change that. One of my verses has to do with bridging the gap in Isaiah 58.
Love that. That's awesome. So Jesus talks a lot about money, and I think that's where sometimes we get tripped up, because we're reading verses in the Bible about Jesus talking about money, and he says things, right? He says things like it's very hard for a rich person to enter in the kingdom of heaven. He says things that you can't have a divided heart, you can't have 2 masters, you can't serve both God and money. So it seems like that's where we get kind of tripped up. In the traditional church, people read those things, you're like, okay, well, God doesn't like money, or so talk to us about this a little bit. Let's bridge the gap.
All right, let me see if I can give you a real quick primer on the biblical concept of how we're supposed to look at money. I'm going to do this as quickly as I can. I do talk about this in God's Business Revival. First of all, we must establish that money itself is only a tool. Money itself is not good or bad. Okay. A stock, or the stock market, so to speak, is neither good or bad, that it is simply a financial instrument and it is a tool. In the verse does not say that that money is the root of all evil. The verse says that the love of money is the root of all evil, which brings us to the second point of the primer. The first is money. The second is mammon. We talk about mammon, and whether mammon, some scholars say that mammon is actually a deity that people worshipped. Regardless, I can guarantee you that it's a deity that has some demonic influence. The best translation for the word mammon is the word avarice, and avarice literally means putting money above everything else. And so what happens is, in fact, the love of money, that's the word there, is avarice. Instead of the love of money, it actually says avarice. And so that's the best definition. So what happens is that anything that gets placed above Christ, any thing that gets placed above God, Jehovah, is an idol. And so if we love money that much, that's where the challenge comes in. And so the third concept is first money, second mammon, the third manna. Okay, is that the reason God gave manna to the children of Israel as they were stuck in the desert was so they learned to rely on Him, and they learned to have a relationship with Him. And so, in fact, if they didn't do the relationship with Him with this manna correctly, the manna spoiled. By the way, God is a perfect God. Not only did He provide a complex carbohydrate in the morning, He provided lean meat in the evening with the quail. So God knew these fancy diets before these fancy diets existed. But if you understand that manna is really an attitude about money where you have a reliance and a relationship with God, what you realize is that when you talk about the rich young ruler, is that you realize that it was a heart issue with the rich young ruler. It wasn't a money issue. It was a heart issue with the rich young ruler, because the opposite of an attitude of manna is an attitude of mammon, which is greed and corruption. Manna is an attitude of caring and sharing, and we could dive into that. We don't have time for that today, but that's really where we've got to reformulate our thinking about money and realize that if Deuteronomy 8 is correct, and of course it is, where it says that God has given us the power to get wealth, that doesn't mean that God is passing out $100 bills. He's capable, and He's done it to me. But what that means is that God has put the power within us to get wealth. And the reason is, as the verse continues, is to establish His covenant with Him together. And Jesus Christ came to fulfill that covenant completely. And so we're now grafted into the Abrahamic covenant because of Jesus Christ. And so our whole attitude towards money needs to be that, okay, God, I'm doing this for You, whether I've got $10 or $10,000, God, this is all about You.
I love that. That's amazing. And I liked what you just talked about. It was a heart issue. And we talk about worship a lot. I just came back from a men's retreat, and we talked about worship. And you have a chapter in your book called Work is Worship. So a lot of times when we think about worship, we think in the traditional sense, hey, let's go sing some songs. It used to be hymns. Now it's, Christian music at the church. But what's your definition of worship? And when you say work is worship, what does that mean?
Well, the most simplistic way to describe that is if you look up the word, just Google the word avodah, Avodah. Just Google that word. It's a Hebrew word. And even in the modern Hebrew, that word means both work and worship. And so when I discovered that, I started to dig into where this word avodah was in the Old Testament. And there was this crazy, crazy overlap between worship and service. And so, and people think of the word service as, okay, well, that's serving God. And we're talking about the priest serving God, or we're talking about, no. You've got to think service of more as a serving your fellow man. Keep in mind, great business minds have said repeatedly that if you want to make money in the business world, find a problem and solve it. what better definition of service is there? Okay. And so we need to be in a service mode and a worship mode, because our work, our service that we do on a daily basis, again, we got to get away from the Greek thinking and go back to the Hebraic thinking, because the work is not carnal, and church is holy. They're both sacred. And that's the way the Hebrews live. That's, by the way, it's a little hint, that's the way Jewish people still live today, is that they understand that their worship and their work are the same thing. That's why in general they're more successful than any other race, especially on a percentage basis. So we have got to pursue this concept. Oh, by the way, the Greek word that is used as service and work as well is also the root word of those two words is the same word. So even in the New Testament, there's still this huge connection between work and worship. So I challenge you to dig into that and to read and to find out more about what that means to you personally, about how you can use what you do on a daily basis as service. Now, let me tell you something. That's not easy. Okay. I have bosses. I've done whatever I've needed to do to get by. I've had some crazy part-time jobs. And so it's not always easy to do that. But what I can tell you is that's the reason is because God's building character in you towards this attitude of worship and towards your relationship with him.
Yeah. No, it's good. I'm glad you put that in there. That is not easy, and so thank you so much, Tim, for just sharing. I can tell that you've really studied this. I mean, you're literally sitting at teachers' feet. I mean, you have so much wisdom in you, just talking about the words and what they mean, and it's just amazing. And I believe that there is a revival coming. I think you said this in your book, Billy Graham, right? He quoted that the next revival would be in the workplace, right? And that's exactly what you're doing. So I want to ask you this. Have you seen this revival? Have you seen this movement started? You know, we look back in maybe the 60s, 70s, the big Jesus movement, right? And I think you talked about that in your book. What have you seen happening in the workplace?
Reference the Jesus movement really quick. Let me say this, is that the Jesus movement was a powerful movement that the mainstream church missed. And that's because the church wasn't ready for a bunch of barefoot hippies, literally, in most cases, to walk in the door. And they expected them to not come as they were and to grow, but they expected them, okay, after you shower, you put a suit on, et cetera, then you can walk in the door. We can't do this with this last great move of God, with this last great third great awakening. What we have to do is we have to realize that God is working in the business world where he is, and the church has to be ready to release release themselves from outside the four walls and not insist that they're there. Talk a whole lot about more about that later, but here's what I see right now happening in the marketplace. Okay, I see God working in the marketplace like never before from a provision standpoint. And I continue to hear miraculous stories. I just read a story this morning about somebody who had committed to a nonprofit venture that had to do with orphans, but he had put all his own money and everything into it, and he was struggling. Well, a few years earlier, he had told his boss about this in the interview when he first got the job. In fact, talked more about that than anything else, and the boss hired him. Well, a couple years later, or whatever it was, he wound up at a holiday function or something. And he asked he said, hey, so-and-so, come up and tell us about this vision that you have. It just is so awesome. Would you share it? And out of that meeting, somebody came up and wrote a check and covered half of all the expenses for this new orphanage that he was putting together. And whether it's that or whether it's a need that you have, I'm starting to see these miracles. I told you earlier where God can drop money out of thin air. I've had that happen to me in the last couple of years on multiple occasions where I have been praying into something and God shows up, and he just all of a sudden literally somebody comes up and says, hey, here's X amount of dollars. Mm-hmm. Or there's a gentleman right now that's starting a television network, and He's a wonderful man of God. He's out here, obviously, in the Los Angeles area, but he's starting a television network, and he is. In fact, I'll just share. It's JUL Jewel TV is what it is. Some great family friendly business friendly programming, and God friendly programming, because this is a man of God. But he tells me how God has shown up, okay, and done his thing, and how God works through these business environments, because people are starting to see the power of God move. And so we've got to be open to that in our personal lives, okay? And so we've got to be open to not only God providing financially, but God providing other solutions. And the way we do that is we make ourselves this light, okay? We make ourselves this light that attracts to us. And sometimes the brighter we shine, the madder the darkness gets. And that's okay. We got to keep moving forward, because the darkness obviously wants to stay dark, but our commitment is to be the light. And so this is really starting to, we are at infancy stages on this right now. I know there's a lot of stories I don't know about. In fact, if you've got some about how God's moved in the marketplace, I want to hear about it. If your viewers got any, have them contact me, because I want to hear these stories. But one of the places I really see this happening is that there are several organizations that are grasping this and starting to pop up. Okay, whether it's Ed Silvoso and his organization, the Kingdom Business Association out of Morningstar Ministries, Kingdom Investors out of Australia, Miracles, Marketplace Miracles is a local group here in Los Angeles, incredible group. Heaven in Business is another group that's really starting to see some real. And the thing is that there's these little pockets that are starting to come up of kingdom people who are getting together, sharing stories, and watching these miracles unfold. We are in such an infancy stage right now with this, but I tell you what, it is starting to move, and we need to let the kingdom business light shine, because it needs to be the exact opposite of what's happening right now in our marketplace, okay? Because Jesus is about freedom and about doing what we need to do. And yes, I'll say he's about success, because you can't read Matthew 25 without seeing a little bit of success in there. And so, and a bunch of other chapters. And so he is about moving forward financially. He is about success, okay? This is, again, got to make sure your heart's right, like we talked about earlier. But it's those times that your light shines and people look at you and like, oh. And again, the darkness is going to get more agitated as the light becomes brighter. You can tell I've got a passion there.
No, that's good. I mean, you're really getting me excited, especially we're just talking about, I mean, just the revival, the revolution, the infancy stage. I mean, this is really exciting, and there's not a lot. It's just there's so much potential there, and we need business leaders out there to really grab a hold of this and to partner with God in their everyday life and everything, not just in their business, but in their homes, and their communities, and so much more. So thanks for sharing your message, Tim. I really appreciate it. Last question before we go to the last fire round of the show. What's your message out there to all the business leaders listening?
Do business the right way. Let me explain that very briefly. When it says things like the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the righteous, we've got to realize that word righteous means doing things the right way. Okay. And it doesn't mean that we're right, that we are the righteousness of God in Jesus Christ, which we are. However, there is a practical application of righteousness, and that is doing things the right way. And it's an attitude of caring and sharing. Dave Hodgson uses that term. It's an attitude of caring and sharing with the priorities of people, profit, and planet. I like to use the term, it's a win-win-win scenario, because kingdom principles are in play when you win, your clients win, your employees win, your contractors win, everybody wins in the occasion. And so we have to do business the right way, because if we do business the right way, the righteous way, which is not the Babylonian way of greed and corruption. Two quick examples. One, Boaz and Ruth. The way Boaz let others glean his field, not only let him meet his wife, but the part we miss is that it allowed that gleaning allowed the community immediately surrounding Bethlehem to flourish when the rest of the country, most of the rest of the world at that point in time, was in economic despair. But Bethlehem and where Boaz was flourished because they made their own microeconomy a lot because of what people like Boaz did in that time, and it allowed this gleaning allowed this whole extra economic system to take place that was trading between those less fortunate, that really raised everybody's standard of living. My other favorite example is near the end of the movie Pretty Woman, when Richard Gere's character says, "Let's build ships together," and so but that's just it. I mean, it's you got to think it's an everybody win scenario.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great message. Thank you so much, Tim, for your message, your book, guys. Go get God's Business Revival. Tim, you have another book, God's Business Faith, so get that as well, and possibly a new book coming out, God's Business Revolution.
I've been working on, hopefully next year. I've been working on that one for a couple of years, and so God keeps telling me to fine tune some things, and so we'll get it. Yep.
Awesome. Sounds good, guys. Go check that out. And the website, again, is, Tim, God's Business Revolution?
God'sBusinessRevolution.com. Sure is.
Check that out, guys. All right, Tim, I always like to end every podcast with a little fire round. So here's your fire round today. Best book recently read?
Best book recently read? Biblical guidebook on deliverance.
Interesting. That sounds like a mouthful, but very application. So I'm gonna get that one. That's I always ask that question, write them down so I can get them right after the show. So, all right, what's a scripture that like you hang on to?
One of the biggest scriptures I hang on to, and there's a couple similar to this. But let's go to Isaiah. They're both in Isaiah. One's in Isaiah 61. One's in Isaiah 58. Let's go to Isaiah 61, where it basically talks about rebuilding the cities. Okay, and so there's this whole thing. Jesus quotes the first of Isaiah 61, but when it talks that's his mandate, and part of his mandate is our mandate. And in Isaiah 61, it literally says that we're supposed to rebuild the cities.
Cool. All right, favorite subject you have studied? I know you've studied a lot. So what's like one thing you
favorite subject I've studied has probably got to be biblical economics.
Awesome. All right, so what do you love to do in your spare time?
Well, what I love to do that I have not done in a very long time, and I live in California, so you think I would be, and that's stand-up paddleboarding. I love that, and have been out of commission for a year or so, and I'm hoping that next season, next summer, I'll be back into that again.
Awesome. I hope so too. Awesome, Tim. Well, thank you so much for being on the Brett Snodgrass podcast today. Guys, again, go check out Tim's book and his website, God's Business Revolution. Check out God's Business Revival, God's Business Faith, and all that Tim has to offer. And if you're interested in coaching or consulting with Tim, I'm sure he'd be happy to do that as well. So thanks, Tim. Appreciate you, buddy.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for checking out the Brett Snodgrass channel. If you like this video, please slam on that like button. And if you really like it, then subscribe to our channel here. And remember to leave us a comment below, and I'm going to try my hardest to reply to all the comments. Thank you guys so much. This is why I do what I do. Every single week, I come out with content that focuses on success, freedom, and living out your purpose. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.